Welcome to Everyday Ethical Dilemmas by Jennifer McAdams. I've decided to do my project on cat31. The description of my class. Prescription Transcription is a class offered to students who wish to become pharmacy technicians. It's a foundation course taught at community colleges. Students range from their 20s to their 60s. It's a diverse and interesting topic, and the students really enjoy it. A description of everyday ethical dilemmas. This is a really unique and intuitive way for the instructor to gain perspective on how their students are learning to cope with issues that are sensitive and have to do with understanding other people's behavior or motivations. Some of the pros of cat31. This is an in-depth analysis of student behavior on a targeted event. Fictional situations add realism but do not threaten real lives, and students work independently as they would in everyday practice. Some of the cons of cat31. The amount of time to develop genuine scenarios can be longer than usual. A teacher really needs to have a lot of perspective on what exactly a technician needs to know. The teacher may find themselves emotionally involved if the student does not answer in an appropriate way to a situation. This is very clearly outlined in cat31 by the authors of Classroom Assessment Techniques. And this is really important to consider if you're going to use this cat in your classroom. Also, the amount of time a student may need to answer the question could be longer than allowable. This is an in-class, informal assessment technique. Therefore, you really need to put a time limit on how long it takes for a student to answer the question. What's the purpose of Everyday Ethical Dilemmas? Well, I'm using this cat to develop a baseline measurement of the student's understanding of how to handle ethical and emotional situations in the workplace. The goals of this classroom assessment technique are to identify sensitive patient issues, resolve conflict between patient and prescription, to create workable solutions with respect to both patients and prescribed ethical codes, and to provide exceptional customer service. There is not a pharmacy technician working today who does not work in a retail environment. Customers pay their salaries, so it's really important to be sensitive but ethical at the same time. A word of caution, though. In order for this cat to be useful, it will require the instructor some time to develop a strategy for asking the questions. For myself, I carefully considered what I thought was important about transcribing and developed the following question. An attractive female patient comes to the drop-off counter at your pharmacy. She has an RX for narcotic painkillers, and she tells you she's from out of town. She wants to pick up her prescription in 15 minutes. However, it looks suspicious because it's for a large quantity of medication. What do you tell her? From my own experience and background, I figured this was a great starting point for an in-class informal assessment question. My expectations were that by making the patient in question attractive, I wondered if this would be a factor in confronting her about her forged RX, because 30% of my class was female. From my own perspective, a forged prescription can look very much like an actual prescription. That's the point. And it is important for students to understand that knowing what legally must appear on a prescription is the key to discovering and guaranteeing its authenticity. How useful is the information gathered from this cat? I found it a wonderful way to weed out how my students are actually developing their thought processes. So first I gathered the responses from the students and separated them into categories. I examined the answers and let the students know if there was a trend in their responses. By examining each student response, I could then decide which topics needed to be clarified and which topics were maybe a little too clear. My students responded interestingly. They were very clear and respectful to the customer, and they each decided that the prescription was in fact a forgery and that the lead pharmacist would be the best person to deal with the situation, which is a great answer as a starting point. So in conclusion, I found this was a wonderful technique to use when you want to learn more about how your students think. In a program where a student is going to be interacting with a patient in a very vulnerable and open way, for a prescription, it's important for the technician, the student, to learn to be respectful and calm and what I like to call a poker face about any kind of question that may be asked of them. For topics that are medical or where you deal with a client in a sensitive environment, massage therapy, dental hygienist, I can think of 1,000 of them, and the patient sometimes feels vulnerable, motivating the students to think about how they would handle this patient is incredibly critical. So I'd like to thank you for listening to my presentation. The full text for Classroom Assessment Technique number 31 is available in Classroom Assessment Techniques, written by Thomas A. Angelo and K. Patricia Cross, and it's on page 271. I encourage you to take a look at it.